Welcome back to Shhh Grown Folks Talking. I'm your host, CKCZ, and my special guest is Evi, an aspiring director, and we're going to be talking about Barbieheimer, both Barbie and Oppenheimer. The movies dropped simultaneously, and which is new, and so we're just going to get into it. Let's just start overall, your thoughts about both films. Let's start with Barbie, since it starts with a B.
All right. And for the double feature, I did see Barbie first before seeing Oppenheimer. So
okay,
yeah, it just
that works.
sense.
You saw it on the same day?
Yeah, on the same day. Like I managed to find at least a 30-minute gap in between the showing. So it's not like I walked in straight into the next showing, because I think that would have been crazy. But it's yeah. But to get to, I'm just going to start off by saying, overall for both films, like I'll give my score as 8 out of 10 for both of them. And as we go along, I'll explain like how I got to that point of giving them the same score. Because because as I was watching the movie, their scores were very different. But by the end of the movie, they both kind of landed in the same place for me.
Oh, we're gonna have a good discussion, because my score is gonna be different. So let's break down Barbie. What were your initial? You saw the trailer. What were your initial thinking going into the movie? What did you think was going to happen?
So prior to the very, very first teaser trailer, I literally had no interest in watching this. Like, just being very clear right now, it's like it was just, I never grew up with Barbies. I never had a connection to it. So obviously it just wasn't my thing. And I was just going to leave it at that. But the first trailer.
I see you and I raise you. That was my interest for Oppenheimer. That was my reaction to Oppenheimer. I had no interest in seeing Oppenheimer. I saw the trailer and was just like, this is not for me. But we'll get to the reasons why I ended up watching it. Back to you.
Yeah, but for me, it's the interest stopped like even before I saw a trailer for the movie. So when I saw the first teaser trailer, which was parodying like 2001: A Space Odyssey for Stanley Kubrick, that actually got my attention to where it's like, okay, this is actually genius. So if you're gonna like start from how well executed the marketing of Barbie has been, like it's because you got to think about it, like a lot of people are attributing Barbieheimer as being this brand new thing, but honestly, it's like we've seen this type of marketing push before.
Have we though? Have you seen a movie where? Have you seen a marketing strategy where two movies same day?
Oh, here's the thing. That is not a studio marketing. That is not a studio marketing strategy. I'm talking about exclusively just if we're gonna isolate Barbie by itself. Like I'm gonna relate most of how I view, because Barbie Mania kind of like became a thing similar to how Tim Burton's Batman affected the zeitgeist back in 1989. Where it just became this explosive thing of like, the build up to the Tim Burton Batman movie, everyone wanted to get Batman t-shirts, Batman toys, Batman stuff, and everyone just wanted to have that symbol on their chest when they watched the film. Whereas for Barbie, it's like everyone just instinctively was like, I'm gonna wear pink when I watch this movie. It just delved into this place of like, I feel like I need to see this. And, you know, the products, like it was marketing to like various different people now. It's not just limited to the demographic that was initially for.
Yeah.
So they really had a heavy push. And I think this was like the smart thing that Margot Robbie and Greta Gerwig talked about. Is like, if we want this movie to succeed, we have to think about the people who don't like this.
Yeah. And that was in the first trailer. Like, if you love Barbie, you'll love this movie. If you find Barbie problematic, you'll love this movie. And I was surprised that after watching the movie, I was like, oh, yep, they actually answered those questions in this movie to where I can see both sides. I see you and I rate you for the marketing. It was intense. So much so that I heard
it was everywhere. It was in your face. And it was just one of those things where you can't escape it, to the point where it's like, you cannot avoid this movie. They were never going to let you avoid this movie.
So almost like bullying. Someone said, or like tweeted or whatever, I was almost bullied into seeing this film because it's being talked about in the news, it's being talked about in pop culture, all the different marketing tie-ins. So I'm wearing Hi Barbie nail polish from Pop-Up. I went to see the movie from a press screening, and they had like a activation with the where it's a life-size box that you take pictures in, the OPI, and I read or heard that 100 different brands were associated with this Barbie marketing rollout, which I feel like this is probably going to be, this type of rollout is going to be discussed in school, of how you take something that's a nostalgic trademark material and put it out in the world to where you can't escape it. Like anytime, like guys are wearing pink, and the meme where I'm a Barbie who, like, that was in the very initial thing being rolled out on Instagram. I was like, oh, sure. And the opposite could be said for Oppenheimer. I would say the marketing wasn't as strong, if any. It was more like, if you like Christopher Nolan, it was more director based, in my opinion. But my algorithm was pulling Barbie stuff, and I barely saw any marketing for Oppenheimer. What was your thoughts for Oppenheimer in terms of marketing?
So Oppenheimer was just built on the strength of, like, you like Christopher Nolan, so you're going to watch this. That's pretty much just built on the strength of, like, and also it's an interesting subject matter, but you don't think summer blockbuster with the guy who made the atomic bomb.
Absolutely.
That is just unusual in itself. Usually that's something that's allocated to, like, fall season, when the prestige films are trying to get their Oscar nominations or anything like that.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. But did you finish your Barbie marketing push?
Well, in order to tie it into the whole Barbieheimer phenomenon, so we have to start with Christopher Nolan leaving Warner Brothers due to how they handled the release of Tenet during the pandemic.
Tell me.
Yeah, so Christopher Nolan was not pleased with the way Tenet was released, because they released it in theaters and then they just shoved it on HBO Max. They didn't give him the amount of time that they agreed that it was going to run in theaters, but it was the height of the pandemic. So of course it's like not many people were eager to go see a movie at that time.
Yeah.
But that was still enough to upset him that they went behind his back of, we're just going to shove it on HBO Max without consulting you about it first. And so he left and joined Universal, because Universal said, what do you want? And he said, I want $100 million to make a biopic about Oppenheimer. And Universal Pictures said, okay, because Christopher Nolan has worked with Warner Brothers for, I think, 15 years. So this is the first time he's ever moved to a different studio. And yeah, so it was almost like when he left, when he announced he was leaving Warner Brothers, everyone wanted him, and Universal is the one that won out. So
that is so kind of, I don't know, full circle, that a Warner Brothers film with Barbie teamed up with a Universal picture.
It wasn't supposed to be a team.
Okay. Wow.
So this is just, a lot of people are just guessing, but they're like, when Oppenheimer was announced to release on July 21st, a few weeks later, Warner Brothers says, we're going to release Barbie on July 21st.
They were trying to stick it to him. Okay, that makes sense. Like, that's movie business stuff.
Yeah, so it turned into this weird thing of, like, we're going to take away business from you because you left us. But film geeks were kind of like, that's weird. Like, for people who don't know the drama that's going on, their interpretation of it is like, that is really weird to put those two movies together on the same day.
Well, see, that's why you're here, because I didn't have that context. So I thought it was in the genius realm of Barbie is kind of centered toward women or people who grew up on Barbies, and maybe young people, couple, really adults. But you can make a case to take your kids, although I wouldn't recommend that, your young kids. And then I was like, Oppenheimer seems more like the guy film. So if you're a couple, you're both going to the movies. Hey, you go to Oppenheimer, I'll go to Barbie, and we'll meet in the middle. Or if you go to this one with me, I'll go to that one with you. That's what I thought they were doing. So it'd be like, like pink and blue type deal. And that is not the case. Cause I was like, that's odd, but interesting.
Yeah, it's very odd, and plus it started off as a joke between like the film community, who are like really like big fans of Greta Gerwig and big fans of Christopher Nolan. They're like, well, we got two great directors, why don't we just watch both of them at the same time? And this is probably this is how I think Oppenheimer benefited a lot from it, because it's like, this is one of those cases where an internet meme that was limited to just the film community space somehow leaked into like the general audience space, where they also got in on the, hey, why not just watch both? Like this, let's not make this a competition. Let's just watch both. And yeah, so because of that meme, every time Barbie gets mentioned, Oppenheimer gets free press. Because, yeah. So this thing that was supposed to be like a FU to Chris Nolan from Warner Brothers, it backfired, but it also benefited both of them in a weird way.
For sure, because the only reason why we're doing both is because I said this will be a good episode for a podcast, and because other podcasts were talking about them both, I said I might as well bite the bullet and watch Oppenheimer, because it's not my vibe. Like Oppenheimer, like I said, the trailer didn't appeal to me. The only thing I know Christopher Nolan did Inception, he did Tenet. The film that I most associated him with is The Dark Knight, which I think is a brilliant film. It's a day changer, meaning if it comes on, I'm gonna watch it. So that's what got me, that they got my money based off the team up, because otherwise I would have been Barbie and I would have been done. So moving on, let's dive into your thoughts on Oppenheimer as a character study of Robert Oppenheimer and his theoretical scientist trying to build the first atomic bomb and succeeding.
So my overall thoughts regarding just isolated to Oppenheimer are, this is like, it's unusual to say this, but it was a biopic, but it had the speed, like the first 2 hours, at least for me, it had the speed and momentum of a blockbuster, but like it just felt like information was happening quickly. There felt like there was this ticking clock that was building up to something. And it just had that, I understood where it just had that feeling of, oh, this feels like a summer blockbuster for some odd reason. I can't quite pinpoint it, but it was just how information was presented and how they presented it. Also, like Oppenheimer collecting the scientists he needed felt very much like, hey, we're recruiting the Avengers, the science community, where it treated like, even if you don't know each scientist by name, and they do take a moment to be like, this guy's important, like, and everyone knows who Einstein is. So that's another big thing.
Well, I see you and I raise you. For me, that first hour was a lot of talking and a lot of setup. And generally, it was too long for me. Just 3 hours, I felt like, Nolan, you could have cut this to 2:30, maybe 2. Or in my opinion, because it picked up once we got to the mushroom cloud, in my opinion. Like, that's when the movie picked up, and I understood why he had the Avenger kind of scientist, but I have to say, it was so much dialogue, and I didn't know who these other scientists were and why they were important. I was like, you kind of have to rewatch the film in order to get a lot of the context that they were saying, because they were also talking about science. So you're talking about science, which is not a discipline that I'm totally familiar with, anymore. And then theory, and then all these famous people, but the only person that I could that I knew who had an origin story that I was familiar with was Einstein. And he came in the first part and then he came in towards the end. So I was like, who are these other people? And so it started off weak in my opinion. And the third out, and then it picked up Mushroom Cloud. They did it. And then the third hour with the whole kind of politics of it and trying to take him down, like that was exciting. So that was kind of the blockbuster. And it seemed like it went faster. Like it was like, go to the committee, then go to Strauss, and then go to Oppenheimer. And so that's kind of where I fall into the kind of the blockbuster analogy that you gave. But it was a lot of people. It was a lot of white men. A lot. And only 2 women. So your thoughts on...
There was a third one, but they didn't really dwell on her importance of the entire thing. But it was the one played by Olivia Thirlberry. I think that's how you say her last name. She was the one who postulated the question of like, hey, Hitler is gone. Do we actually still have to go through with this? And
at Los Alamos?
Yeah, at Los Alamos, when they already gathered the other researchers together. And she was like saying, do we still have to go through with this? Mm-hmm. And his reasoning is like, well, yeah, we have to. Like, we have... It's one of those weird things where the big theme about this that also kind of relates to Barbie is like both films are about an existential crisis.
For sure.
It's just his film, which is why both of them kind of also work as a double feature, weirdly. But it's but his crisis more is about the legacy that he's leaving behind and he can't escape from.
Yeah.
Yeah, whereas Barbie is somebody who has to come to terms with her legacy and that her legacy can change, and it just depends on, it just depends on the individual and how they how they see her. But for Oppenheimer, his legacy can't change. It's locked in.
Yes, I agree with you. And I would say that the theme of like he was conflicted because he's a theoretical scientist, so these are ideas that he's had in his head for a while now. And now I feel like a reason why he couldn't stop was because I want that innate ability. I want to prove that my theory, what I'm thinking about, can actually come to fruition. Like it's what And they kind of Nolan, like in the very beginning, the first hour, like he's dreaming and he sees the mushroom clouds and I was like, okay, so kind of for a little bit of foreshadowing. So yeah, I see you. I hear you on that. And then the other thing, I put it as, I kind of thought this film was going to be a biopic, but it ended up being more of a character study. And other people have said that too. And I was like, oh, I agree with that. And I kind of wish I would have known that going in, that it was a character study. And also, I kind of feel what this film, I needed from this film, I needed more backstory on Oppenheimer because I just knew like he invented the atomic bomb. That was it. I didn't know anything about all this other stuff. And Nolan did not give any really exposition. He just kind of dropped you in, took forever, and then added all these people. And then all this other like contextual stuff and other threads and plots and conversations, so many conversations, Eva, so many people were talking, that this is a movie you kind of have, I feel like you have to rewatch it in order to get all the details that this movie brought up or showed us. It's not just he invented the atomic bomb. It was a group of people who helped, and they were kind of in a race with the Russians to build it, and then where they're going to drop it. So it was a lot of it. One thing that I read in an article was like he very much took from the book, and that book is 591 pages. And the article was like all the things that you saw was in the book. Like he didn't really trim, and I wish he would have. Just my thoughts.
Yeah. I'd say like the best way to describe it is he thought he was so much into whether or not they could do it. He never stopped to think about whether or not they should do it.
Yeah.
So
that's a basis. That's a theme of the entire film. Yeah.
Because as you'll notice, like I think we differ on like which half we enjoyed more.
Well, which half did you like?
And so it's like I said, how the first 2 hours, and it's not that I didn't enjoy the last hour. It's just once the atomic bomb went off, like this film has been building up to that moment of when they finally did the Trinity test. And that was at the 2 hour mark.
Yeah.
And after that, it's like my body was saying, okay, the movie's done. But it's like, no, it's not.
Me too. Me too. I looked at my watch and I was just like, we got the bomb. And then I said, we got another hour. What is it? What else is there to talk about?
Yeah.
You did it. This horrible thing you built. And then we got another hour to go. So
yeah,
I was ready for this film. So hence my 2:30 hour movie. Let's go then. Okay. So let's go to Barbie. Because Barbie, I enjoyed, and after seeing it, I think I liked it even more. So what were your thoughts with the existentialism of it? Was it too silly for you? My expectations was that it was going to be kind of like she's in Barbie land and then she goes to the real world and she stays there and realizes that women, or she's seen as a object and will be taken advantage of, and not realize how horrible the real world is. So I thought it was going to be that. It was surprising to see that she went back to Barbie land and Ken went with her. Ken went back to Barbie land and changed it to Kingdom. So I'm done talking. Your thoughts about the themes and what you thought about this film, Barbie.
Well, I really didn't know what to expect from Barbie, because even from all the trailers that we saw, even with the main one of explaining they're going to go to the real worlds, I was like, okay, what is going on? What is this movie? Like, that was another reason of why I was intrigued to see it, because I was just like, I want to know what you're doing. Like, that's the main part. But overall, the thing about it is, like, it is, for me, what I latched onto was Barbie's journey of discovering what she actually means overall to like women throughout history, and what she could mean for women after. Like, she's an idea that's going to keep going on forever. And there's going to be like those elements that people are always going to have like problems with what Barbie represents, but it's that strange dichotomy. And I think America Ferrera's character lists off everything that I can't remember off of the top of my head, but if you know, you know.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like that moment is going to be the moment when people talk about this movie years later. They're going to, like, that'll be the clip that they bring up. She was completely unexpected. Her speech, her monologue, I wanted to cheer, but I didn't want to ruin the experience for everybody else. But I'm like, moment,
I remember three women in our screening that did cheer, like, at the end of that. But like, so definitely, so we should have definitely done it.
I should have.
Yeah. I don't think.
What did you think about Ryan Gosling and the character of Ken? Because that surprised me probably the most.
It's strange to say Ken is my favorite character in a Barbie movie, but like, it sounds kind of weird to say that, but at the same time, I think there's a lot of people who are talking about how he's portrayed and what they're saying about men in the film. But but the thing that they've made very clear in the Barbie movie is that Ken is kind of just an afterthought accessory.
Yes.
If you think about it.
Yes.
So, and also they've taught, like, I've seen Greta talk about how they wanted to show like Ken as this almost childlike, where it was only taught this one directive of I need Barbie to like me. Like that's just like that one directive.
Totally.
So him going to the real world and seeing like, oh, this is different. Like
patriarchy.
Yeah, he doesn't have like an adult, or even when he meets an adult, it's hyper stylized of like how kind of misogynistic they are, but it's like there's nobody there to like ring him in on like, no, this is like, this is not like, this is not a good thing, or this is not like, there was nobody there to teach him. So when he takes it over to Barbie Land and it becomes the extreme version of it, it's like, for me, it's like, yeah, that makes sense. And I know like I know several like insecure men who are just like, but you're portraying men as evil, but it's like, no, it makes sense he'd be like that. Like it makes total sense.
I think Greta was very smart in that whole line of saying, because the people are like, oh, this is bashing men. And my first statement is, this is a show about dolls. These are not real people. This is
like
dolls.
If you have a problem with a movie about plastic dolls and you're going to rant or make a 45-minute video about you burning Barbie dolls, then there's something really wrong with you.
Yeah. We're not on the same page. We don't have a baseline.
You don't need to know what I'm talking about, but there are people out there who have done that. And it's
ridiculous. It's how to say it. I'm just like, a doll has gotten you this worked up. But for the movie and Ken, if you have a Barbie, Ken would, like they said when he said it's an afterthought, I was like, oh yeah, was an afterthought. I don't know if Ken had a house, a place.
They even mentioned that in the movie when Ariana Greenblatt's character asked, so where do the Kens stay? Because everyone had a dream house. And Barbie was like, I actually don't know. And it's like one of those questions of, and some people have actually brought it up. It's like, yeah, where does Ken live? Like that doesn't, if he's not living with Barbie, then where does he live? Because Barbie has everything. She has the car, she has the plane, she has like the rocket ship if she wants. She even has like whatever type of house she wants, but Ken is literally just an afterthought, an option. Like that's pretty much the best way to describe Ken. He's optional.
And Alan is the option to the option. So one thing that surprised me the most about this film was that Mattel was very much put all of our good and bad ideas out in this film, which I was shocked at, because usually if you have a movie that's depicting a company, you want to talk about the good stuff. You don't ever want to talk about the mistakes that were made or the bad things, the problematic nature. And Mattel was like, we had a pregnant Barbie, which blew my mind. All those other Barbies, Alan didn't know existed. I knew about Skipper, but all the other rando Barbies was wild to me that someone had an idea and they made a Barbie and it didn't work. One thing I wanted to mention was, speaking of Barbie, that I was talking to some people at a party, and it was an older woman, and they were talking about Issa Rae's character as President Barbie. And Issa has, in a Essence magazine, she said she had a line about Christy, and Christy was the Black version of Barbie. So Mattel made a Barbie, it was a Black girl, and her name was Christy. And Issa Rae kind of had a line about that in that, but it didn't make the final cut. So I said, didn't know Christy was a doll, because I had one Barbie. It was fitness Barbie. And once I cut her hair, I turned her into weird Barbie like Kate McKinnon. So when that Barbie came on, I was like, ooh, I wasn't alone.
I heard a lot of women were able to relate to that weird Barbie thing, which that I was like, I kind of, but then I remember, oh yeah, my cousin did that. So it's like,
yeah. And don't tell me why. At the time, I just wanted to cut her hair. Anywho, someone, I listened to another podcast and they said this movie is like play theory, and meaning they're playing around, like Kens are at the beach playing and Barbie's having the dance party. And when she goes back to Barbie Land and she kind of falls on the ground and she's like flailing, and I was like, oh yeah, like a real doll would. So attention to details was amazing. And like we said, with Weird Barbie was also wild to me. So I enjoyed that film it more than Oppenheimer. It was also under 2 hours, I believe. But the unexpected nature of it was really surprising to me because, again, this is a story about dolls.
Yeah, and I think the most impressive thing for it, at least to me, is if you think about it, like with some of the major big blockbusters that are based on toys, like say Transformers or G.I. Joe, for instance, those are their rival company, Hasbro. So at least for those toys, they have a storyline that you need to follow. Like like you can't deviate, or if you deviate from the story on, you better have a good reason for like deviating from it. There's the good robots, the bad robots. Here's the good soldiers, the evil soldiers. But for Barbie, there is no in-depth lore. It's just presenting you with all these options of what do you want your story to be. And there's something about that where it's like, so with this, you're able to build a narrative around everyone's overall experiences, no matter how they differ. Like, you know, she knew about Weird Barbie, like some people did that. And also like how America Ferrera affected like stereotypical Barbie because of what she's thinking to design. So I just like the fact that like everyone's story affects these characters in how they're supposed to act, and it all keeps just building onto this legacy that Barbie is going to keep having as like she keeps continuing to exist and keeps continuing to give Mattel money. But
so that leads me into possibly our last point, which is the commodification of Mattel and Barbie with this movie being so successful. And you brought up Transformers and I brought up Lego. So one NPR podcast, I've been listening to a lot of podcasts, was talking about how, you know, movies are vehicles to sell product, and their position is Lego does it better, did it best with a Lego movie. Then kids are able to, it's kid friendly, it's a kid film, and adults can watch it as well, but so it works for everybody. And then you're going to go to the store, you're going to have your Lego parties, you want to do Lego builds like in the movie, and or for an adult, like there's Star Wars Legos. There are all these different other properties that Lego can make it, that can become a Lego. And they didn't think Mattel did a good job in hiding the commodity factor. So my thought was, I'm not going to buy a Barbie. I'm a grown person, and this film is not for kids. Maybe like 12 and up, because the themes were very much, kids won't understand a lot of the things they were talking about.
That's kind of something that's like that initially was bringing my rating down, because I was kind of comparing it to the Lego movie in a sense, because it's like they're both about journeys and they're both about properties that don't have hardline stories, so they can just build something around it. But it was one of those things where I remember I was at a family gathering in Dallas like a couple of weeks ago, and the young ones who are like 5 or 6, like my nieces, they're like wondering if they should watch the Barbie movie. But after watching the movie, I was like, I think at 5 or 6, they'll just like the pretty colors.
Yeah.
At 10 and 11, they'll think it's weird. At like 14 and up, they'll be like, oh, I get it. And
I completely agree.
Yeah.
And that the character in the film that totally tore seriously for Barbie up, I was like, oh yeah, that was what a 12-year-old, like, you ruined this, and the way you're built and all that kind of stuff. Like her speech to her that made her cry. I was like, she's dropping truth bombs. But I totally agree. The color, the look of the film would totally be something young kids could get. Like your whole trajectory, like that completely works. And that reminds me kind of Pixar, kind of how Pixar film, kind of the Toy Story or Pixar movies, where kids can get one perspective, but as an adult, they see different themes and it still works. Like both adults and kids still like the movie, but they like the movie for different reasons. So
Yeah. But I do feel
works.
like what some people are arguing the better, like the failure of appealing to kids here, is that this does feel like exclusively you need to be way older in order to understand what is going on
Yeah.
or process what they're saying. Because I feel like, 5 and 6 year olds will like the pretty colors and like what's happening, but they won't get the message.
Mm-hmm.
And 10-year-olds, they're in that phase of thinking they understand, but they'll probably be like, I don't get it.
Right.
So it is one of those things of like, yeah, but with Pixar, it's like you can watch it at any age, but yeah, as you age with the movie of a Pixar movie, it gets better because you start understanding things more and more. Whereas, yeah, with Barbie, I will say that was one of the things that was kind of like bringing it down, where it's like, I'm not sure how much of this is appropriate for a child, or like I have to think of like a specific age when, like if I have a daughter, or if I wanted to take, I feel like my godchild, she's about to turn 10. I think she'll understand it, but I don't know if she'll be engaged with it. Like that's one of those things where it definitely feels like I can take my 20s and 30-year-old cousins to watch it, and we'll have a good time. But yeah, it is one of the things that knocked the film a little bit down for me, because I was thinking about like, how is this going to appeal to like kids, because kids are very much the main target of the demographic. But I understand, like, in a strange way, one of the smart things that Greta did is she was thinking of like, yeah, but what about the person who was a child like several years ago, and let them like understand this entire legacy that was built. And I'm saying legacy a lot, but that's pretty much what's going on with the Barbie film.
What did you think about the plot point of her not getting together with Ken? I thought that was surprising. That I was like, they're gonna be a couple, and that's not what happened. What were your thoughts when she left him in Barbie Land? Did you think they were gonna hook up?
I kind of predicted that they weren't going to wind up together, but I think this also comes. This feels like an entirely different conversation that I'm going to be alluding to. But there has been I have been seeing like recent film studies of I remember one article that stood out to me was, everyone in the Marvel Cinematic Universe is hot as hell, but nobody's having sex, and it's like everything's implied, but you never actually see like romance or stuff like that. And there have been less romantic movies that are like being put emphasis on there, where they're not sure if it's just like the deterioration of the dating scene now, where it just doesn't seem like romance is marketable anymore. But that feels like a separate conversation from what's going on in here. But that's kind of where it carried into my head of like, I bet they don't wind up together. So I was predetermined in my head that they were not going to wind up together, no matter like what plot point was being thrown at me.
Well, it surprised me because the typical convention would be, he has his arc, she has her arc, and they can come together. So it surprised me that they didn't, and that, he was so vulnerable in the end about who am I or whatever. And I thought, I didn't want it to happen because, like he said, he hasn't had a personality or dollinality. He doesn't know who he is. So her speech was very, very unexpected. But in seeing Greta Gerwig's work, she's smart. She thinks about things, and she's kind of an auteur, so she's not going to fall into the typical Hollywood conventions. But
that was another thing too, because it's like, this is an auteur director, and they would usually try to ways of not falling in line with what's expected.
Yeah. Your other point where you talk about the romance is I was listening to a review about Mission Impossible, Dead Reckoning, and how Tom Cruise has no romance in his pretty much, except for like the 3 when he got married. He did.
Yeah, and the second one when he was actively going after a woman, and then the third one when he was married, but that's it.
That's it.
Yeah.
I guess 007 would kind of be, but even then, yeah, it's kind of, I think it's just
But no, somebody even pointed out where it's like, yeah, it seems like, but especially with No Time to Die, like it seems like James Bond is getting away from that Playboy lifestyle, which we don't know if that's going to carry over. I bet it's going to come back somehow when they finally do James Bond again. But yeah, there's just been this overall thing of, I just assume that romances are not going to happen in blockbusters anymore. That's just a thing that people have talked about. So
yeah, I mean, looking back in old films, and we can move on. It's just like Speed is the movie that I can think of where my thoughts are, you just met this person, you're in a dire death or life or death situation, and now I gotta kiss you and we could be a couple. I was just like, it's just not it's unrealistic to me. It's always been unrealistic to me. So
well, that's what people have said. It's like, it makes sense that they're phasing that out of action movies, but from other like big things, especially like most of the romance films are being relocated to streaming. They're not taking the chance of, we're going to have the confidence of having something like this on the big screen. Like, think about it. The reason why Crazy Rich Asians made such a big splash is like, oh, it's a rom-com, and it's like, forget the fact that it's an all Asian cast, but people are like, you're showing a rom-com on the big screen and you're confident about this. But ever since then, it's like, we haven't really seen any romantic films. And you'd say, like, I know No Hard Feelings came out recently
with Jennifer Lawrence.
Yeah, and people have said, okay, I forgot the sex comedy exists, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, where are these other types of films going? Like, where have they been? It feels like once in a while they'll pop up, but and I think that's where I kind of want to circle back to the Barbenheimer effect. That,
please,
yeah. So, like, if you notice, I don't know if you've been keeping track of like the box office for this summer. I'm not just talking about like Barbie and Oppenheimer. I'm talking about the overall summer so far.
Just generally speaking, I know the expectations haven't been good with particularly The Flash and Raiders of the Lost Ark, but I don't know the actual numbers. I just like, oh, the expectation that they haven't met.
Yeah, they are. It's been several like bombings so far. Like, Indiana Jones is barely scraping by. Flash is like the worst performing movie in existence now, and
but Flash had issues a year ago, so
yeah,
it was a wing and a prayer that it even did what it did.
Yeah, but and also, I kind of like, yes, Into the like Across the Spider-Verse did come out and it did make a ton of money.
Yeah,
but I'm talking about like Little Mermaids. It barely made what it needed to make. But that's the thing, when Disney promoted it as a success, but it wasn't building as much momentum as they want. So it was still below expectations of what they wanted. Transformers was the one that surprised people because it's like, okay, you're not making $1 billion. You just barely made it to 500, which is what they needed to make a sequel. But now they're like, you barely just got there. And a lot of these films are struggling. And one thing that people have pointed out is all these blockbusters that came out feel exactly the same. And like, sure, it's the some people will say, well, yeah, it's superhero fatigue, but it's like, no, Indiana Jones, like Disney blockbuster, like Transformers, another blockbuster that follows, which that's actually my favorite Transformers film now, the recent one that came out. But I
agree. We're here. I really enjoyed it. I was surprised at how much I enjoyed that film and was excited to see where this is going. But yeah, like Bumblebee, I think was my number one. But I was cheering when towards the latter half of that film, and I was like, wow! I surprised myself at how much I really liked that film. Go ahead.
Yeah. And I shocked my friends because I remember, like they said, the last time you talked about a Transformers movie, you were angry and ranting for an hour straight about how much you hated it.
They went to the Knights. They went King Charles. I mean, Knights of the Round Table. Is that the one you're talking about?
The one before that, and then I just quit. So like I didn't even see the one with the Knights because I was so angry.
I left early. Go ahead.
But pretty much, but even though I loved the new Transformers movie, I also can't argue it follows the same exact formula of the first movie.
Yeah.
And people will be like, well, does it do anything different story-wise? It's like, no, it does it better. But they're like, yeah, but that's not enough anymore to like motivate people to be like, so you're telling me they do the exact same thing, but slightly better. And it's like, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, okay.
It's a weird one. It's a weird one because I completely agree. There were parts of the film, I liked the beginning part of the film because it was centered in the 90s and the main character, Anthony Ramos, I forget his name, but how he couldn't get a job. And they do
everything they're supposed to do right. And I think I agree with one reviewer who said they did everything right. The problem is the other Transformers movies exist. That's the reason why a lot of people are just not falling in love with this one.
Completely. I completely agree with that. And it's not even it doesn't even come in the same order. I reviewed it, and the person that I reviewed it with she was just like, they're acting like the others didn't exist, and we had to look back.
Well, that's a bigger problem because the producer is saying this is a prequel to the Michael Bay movies, Lorenzo de Bonaventura. But the director of Bumblebee and the director of this movie, Stephen Caple Jr., and the writers, they all said, no, this has nothing to do with Michael Bay.
Yeah.
And the other problem is Bumblebee's face looks exactly the same from the Michael Bay movies. And he doesn't talk. So that's another Michael Bay thing. So it's like you have this leftover from the Michael Bay movies carrying over into these new movies. So there's no visual way of people to understand like, oh, this is supposed to be different.
Yeah.
So
it's confusing.
It's confusing. But to get back to the point of the Barbieheimer thing of why it became this whole phenomenon is people wanted to see something else. It wasn't just the memes. It wasn't just the memes definitely fueled it. Yeah. And Greta Gerwig and Christopher Nolan are two big names in the film community. But as far as general audiences are concerned, they're like, well, it's not a superhero movie. Well, it's not an action movie. Well, it's not this.
Yes.
It's almost like, give me something else. And it's like the audience. And that's why we got Barbenheimer being called like the fourth highest grossing, weekend of all time, behind Avengers and Star Wars. So that tells you, like, if it's behind Avengers and Star Wars in box office, it's like, okay, you got to do something because they're sending a message saying do something different. And that's like, but I think with you getting to the point of like you believing that the studios was the ones who manufactured Barbenheimer, I feel like the studios are going to be like, how do we repeat this?
Oh, for sure.
But you can't because this was an internet joke that took a life of its own.
Lightning in a bottle. Yeah. You can't repeat it. Don't try. Let's wind down. Do with the I want to know your overall rating. That's question 2. But my other question is, do you think they're gonna do a sequel to Barbie, possibly call it Ken, or do you think Greta is like, I said what I needed to say?
To answer, Greta has come out in a recent interview because only directors are allowed to promote their movies now, not the actors. Yeah. But Greta has recently come out saying, I have nothing else to say. So even if they want to make a sequel with her, she's gonna be like, her answer is I don't know. Like, because I feel like everything that I want to say I put into this movie. And so it's like it's gonna get a sequel. I don't know how the sequel is gonna turn out, but it's gonna get a sequel because we know how these things work. Once something like, especially with the amount of money it's making, it's just one of those things where I've also felt like this is one of the first times I actually felt like this is a true female-led blockbuster, in my opinion. Like,
whoa, Patty Jenkins, the first Wonder Woman.
No, that's the point that I want to get to. Is like this. There wasn't this fervor when Wonder Woman came out, and also like, yeah, sure, there was for Captain Marvel, but that was more people being like, oh, I need to watch this in order to understand Endgame. And if you also think about it, yes, we know who Patty Jenkins' name is, but they never promoted Patty Jenkins' name in like the trailers for the first Wonder Woman movie. They never put an emphasis on like, this is the person you need to remember as the director.
It only happened afterwards. Like when it made money, that's when her name started to become mentioned. And then when they did 2 and she wasn't a part of that, that's when her name got brought up. So then my next, go ahead.
Yeah.
Overall,
like the way that I want to put it is with Barbie, I was lingering on a 7 out of 10 just because it's like, part of me is like, I don't know if this appeals to kids. And also, while I like what they did with Ken, for some reason, I felt like I'm not entirely sure if I'm satisfied with his payoff at the end.
Okay.
Like, there's something there where I feel like, what were you trying to do? Like, when they tell him, you just need to be Ken, like, find your own thing. For some reason in my head, I was like, I don't feel like that's enough. Like, it's just because of all the stuff that he's done prior to that.
Yeah.
It didn't feel like a satisfactory, like, gut punch to like, hey dude, you need to wake up. It's like,
it wasn't a period to his story. It was more like a comma.
Yeah. It just felt like, I feel like I'm craving something more for him to be Ken, but I just don't know what it is. And the other thing is, like, the one that actually brought down the movie a lot for me was when they went to the real world. It was too cartoony for me.
Okay.
Yeah. Which I did, like, had a talk with my friends while we were like waiting for Oppenheimer. He did say, you know what I wanted? I wish the real world felt like a Christopher Nolan world where everything was so sterile and so like everyone's just jaded. Everyone's not like hyper, and like Barbie has this effect of like, but that just feels like a whole other can of worms to get into. But yeah, especially with the Mattel stuff, like, I do like the fact that Mattel allowed them to make fun of them, but at the same time, the other part of me is like, it's too much. Like, I felt the board was too much, and part of me was also like, did they need to be there? Like, when I think about it, it's like, did they act? Because it felt like a problem that was exclusive between Barbie and America Ferrera's family and whatever Ken found out in the real world. But I was also like, what is going on with Mattel? I'm not entirely sure how I felt about that. And it just,
I agree. And like they ended it, there was no payoff. So Will Ferrell, which he kind of played the same. He played the lesser version of his Lego movie counterpart. Yeah, absolutely. And they weren't even like, when you get to the last part of the scene or the last part of the movie, what was their point? Like, yeah,
like, I didn't understand, like, why did they even need to go to Barbie Land? Like, their whole thing was like, they wanted her to go back, so why did they have to go chase her? That didn't make any sense to me.
That could have been easily cut and wouldn't have messed with the plot at all. I agree with you. I can agree with you that. I gave it a
no, hold on.
okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so another thing was like for me at least was there was a point during America Ferrera's speech where you know that term of like beating the message over your head with a hammer. It felt like America Ferrera, like it felt like the entire movie was walking around showing me the hammer, but they never hit me with it. So it just had this lingering feeling of like, we got something to tell you. I'm just going to tell you, I'm not going to hit you with it. But I constantly felt like the hammer was about to hit me at any moment, but they never do. It all just felt like a bunch of threats, but never followed through with it, which I'm fine. But there are just points where it did come off as too preachy, but then there's a part of me that feels like, but it kind of needs to be. So it's just about my comfort zone of like, how well did you incorporate your message into the story, and how much of it is just, here's the director talking at this point, or here's what Margot is actually wanting to say. But so that's where I came to like a 7 out of 10, but it bumped up to an 8 out of 10 just because I had so much fun with this movie. Like it was just a lot of fun, and the audacity of them telling this type of story and getting away with it, because this feels like everything that a corporation would not allow you to talk about on a film. Like everything, like it's like you said, like it's everything should be about making the product look good, but in here it's like, no, we're going to talk about everything, the good, the bad, and we're going to tell it in the best way that we possibly could. So it bumps up higher, and every time I do think about the movie, I actually like it more and more. It's just whenever I go back to Ken's journey, I'm like thinking, I still don't know how I feel about that. And maybe it's because I'm a guy, because I'm like just trying to understand, like, what are you trying to tell me? Like that's something that feels specific to me, where it's like, what am I supposed to be taking away from that? Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be taking away from that specific thing, because I get like Margot, like I get Barbie's journey, like Margot Barbie's journey, and it was an emotional relief when she finally had that talk with Ruth, like the creator of Barbie, and that felt like a payoff. But then to follow it up with Ken, and it's like, I don't know what I'm supposed to feel with you. Like I really don't. Like you're
changing my rating as you talk, because I was at a 9. I was at an 8 leaving the theater. Then as I processed, I brought it to a 9 because I would see it again. It was, the jokes hit to me. I thought it was funny, and the unexpected that I keep going back. But now your Ken theory has brought me back down to an 8. I'm at an 8. I think I would own this film. I'd rewatch it to catch even more. But I think in rewatching it, I think I might be back at an 8 again. So you've changed my mind, because I was at a strong 9. Now let's talk about Oppenheimer. What's your rating for Op?
So,
or why you had 8 out of 10 for that? Tell me why.
So mine was actually a 9 out of 10 while I was watching the movie. Like it was a 9 out of 10 while I was watching the movie. It was the last hour of the movie that put the strain on my head, where it's like, I want to get out of here. Like where it's like I was interested, but then it became, this is something that has become a criticism of just me personally with Christopher Nolan films, is that I feel like he has an ending, but then he has the need to keep going. And it's like that with, I think the biggest one, especially with The Dark Knight, like that was the first, like as much as everyone raves about the perfection that is The Dark Knight, and that is still a 9 out of 10 movie for me, but at the same time, the last 30 minutes that deals with Two-Face, after he deals with Joker, I felt like, okay, the movie's done, but then the last 30 minutes is him dealing with Two-Face, and I'm like, what is this? Like, I thought the movie was over. And so I feel that same impact with like, even with like, I felt like Inception was the only time, Inception and Dunkirk were the only 2 times where he ended when he needed to end. But Interstellar and Tenet, it felt like those movies had an ending, but they just kept going. And But the difference here is that it's not that I didn't hate the stuff that happened with the last hour. I actually did find that last hour intriguing. It's just my patience was like, I thought we're done. Like it just kept, and as the movie kept going, I was like, I thought this is, all right, we're not done yet. And every time I thought the court was over, it's like, oh, we're still not done yet. It's like we're still going. And
That
it
was
sucks
me.
because it sucks because I feel like this is like Cillian Murphy killed it in this movie. Like that is like an amazing performance. But the last hour was but the last hour was Robert Downey Jr.'s. Like
Oscar nominee as well for supporting, for sure.
Yeah, because that was like I talked about it with my friends after we got out of the theater. Where like that was the first time I didn't think Iron Man was on screen.
For sure.
Like this was the first time I remembered. Oh yeah, you're an actor. You're a really, really good actor. Like you're really good.
He made me remember that last hour. I was like, oh, okay. Like I didn't even see Robert Downey Jr. I saw the politician Strauss, and I was just like, his heel turn was it was shocking to me. And then the whole where was the confliction of was Oppenheimer a part of the Communist Party? He was like, I'm a patriot, but then as Strauss would say, I'm not so sure. And then he talked about his perspective, which made me question that point. And I was like, I don't know. But for rating, because for my rating, I'm putting it at a 7, 6. And the reason is it's hard because the acting was incredible. The cinematography, incredible. Los Alamos, the mushroom, like all that. The sound, if they don't get a nomination for sound, was amazing.
The moment the atomic bomb happens, I was like, okay, that's it. That's all right. But then the sonic boom, like that followed. I was like, okay, that got me. Like
that got me.
That got me back. Because
for sure. Yeah. But and the dialogue, while was very like it was a lot of things happening. Everyone acted and performed, but the time just really lowered. It just hampered the movie overall, being so long. And then that, like I said, that first hour, it was just hard to understand what is happening. And he didn't really explain a whole lot, which I got lost a lot. And I would say Florence Pugh and Emily Blunt, I just felt like Florence Pugh in the topless scene was kind of a stunt cast and I also know she's a better actress than that. And it just seemed like, and her point, like her character, which I looked up, her character was important to him, but in the film, it just seemed like, and my big thing is time. That character kind of could have been just words or cut short or put clothes on her. I was just like, why? I started saying why a lot. Emily Blunt's character is like, she didn't have a lot to do. She came in towards the end. And it just seemed like she was underutilized. And it just wasn't like the kids say, it just wasn't my vibe. But so it's hard for me to recommend this film. If you like Nolan, then I bet you probably will love this film or have a favorable opinion. But would I recommend it? I probably wouldn't. And it'd be hard pressed for me to rewatch it. If I could rewatch, yeah. And if I would rewatch it, I would have to watch 1 hour, come back. Like I would have to watch it over 3 days, personally.
Like there's a good 2 films in this one movie. Like,
I agree.
That's the thing about it. So like you could literally edit this into 2 different movies. That's the way that I see it.
Completely agree. Or I know Nolan does. I was like a limited miniseries. Because I think like he was a very complicated person, and that was just news to me. And I feel like listening to other people talk, there were things that Nolan kind of didn't dive in deep enough for this film. For example, one person was saying in the scene where he had his lecture, and he was like, the lecture can be open to anyone. And so then there was like one person who came, and then his class grew. And at one point I saw a Black woman in there, and this is the 40s. So I was like, that's surprising. And then I saw a black man in there. So they were saying, this podcaster was saying that was very controversial to have people of color in those rooms. And Nolan was like, we're not going to talk about it. And Los Alamos, there's a line where they said, we're going to give it back to the Native Americans. And I was like, we're not going to talk about that. And then
the way that I interpreted at least the Native American line was, if you look at how he was prior to the bomb going off, his priority was like, we got to get this done.
Right.
And he wasn't, and somebody also like in another podcast had this similar thought of, he was so zeroed in on like, he wasn't thinking about the consequences of taking this plot of land. He was just thinking, this is the best place that we can do this. Like, I'm not going to think about it. The only reason why he's thinking about giving it back to the Native Americans is because he's now living with guilt and he's looking for any reason to redeem himself after that, which he never can. Like, that's the thing. Like, nothing he does, but he's just constantly looking for, like, when I know Emily Blunt's character, like his wife, has talked about he doesn't fight in any of these things, but part of it is like he doesn't have the will to fight because part of him thinks like, do I deserve this? And
I didn't catch that point till much late. I think I had to read something to be like, oh, that's why he didn't fight back. Because I was like, what is she talking about? She's a drunk. I needed a little more. It was a smart movie. I needed just a little more explanation, or I don't know, in order to figure that part out. Like even the black and white, someone said, oh, that's from Strauss's perspective. It's one of those things where technically all the information is there, but because of how long it is and how fast conversations went by, some little bits of information like might slip past you. And it's also, it's an endurance test of like, how much are you willing to tolerate? Yeah. So I can definitely, like, I'm never going to knock anyone. And it is one of those things where it's like, I know who I can recommend this to. Yeah. But I also know who I'm not going to recommend it to. That's a better assessment. I would say that. I would say the recommend versus not recommend. Yeah, I completely agree with you. I completely agree. And the last point, and then we'll end, was I needed, and this was controversial by how we didn't, it would have been nice if they could have figured out a way to talk about the lives that were lost and not just like the scene where he was emotional watching the catastrophe. People were saying, we don't really need to see people dying in the streets or death, the destruction of it. But I would have liked maybe like a title card at the end that said Hiroshima killed, like the numbers, just because it's like you did this incredible, horrific thing.
He did talk about the numbers during one of the hearings.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, somebody did say, do you know how many people died? And then he didn't just list off like how many people died during the impact. He also started listing up numbers. So he had memorized how many people died and how many people died later. That's just to add more to his guilt of like, I need to know how many people died because of what I did.
Okay.
But it was such a quick thing. So there's not a graphic that it says this is how many people died. It's just him looking horrified in this hearing and him saying this information of like, yes, like 800 people on impact, 1,000 more people later due to radiation poisoning. And then but he's saying it in a way that it's like, I don't fault anyone if they don't catch it. But yeah, he does talk about like everything that happened because he wants to know, but he wasn't like, it's like how when he kept asking Matt Damon's character, like, I want to know when you drop it. And they don't tell him. He finds out on the radio. He's not ill. Like and so I think also, I think a thing that kind of like, but this is something that I personally relate to is like when Oppenheimer was giving that speech, the victory speech in the school stadium that they had set up there.
Yeah.
Like to me, that is the best visual representation of an anxiety attack about to happen. Because like with the world shaking around you and you feel like different sounds are just like not processing, but he has to keep it, like he has to try and keep it together to where what he's saying doesn't match what he's feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And
that was, I agree. That scene resonated with me. I was just like, oh, that's good. And it just definitely encapsulated his conflicted character. All right, we'll end it there. We will end it there. Thanks so much, Evi, for chatting with me. We went around the world. My biggest concern was our conversation going to be similar conversations that I've heard? And the answer is no. I've heard no podcast go as deep and off the rails in rabbit holes like this one. So thank you as always.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Like and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.